Well, thank you for having me. I know many of you, and today's sermon may be a little different. As stated, we live in Trenton, near Bar Harbor. I got a job there about 8-9 years ago. I work as a computer programmer at Jackson Laboratory, and I've been doing that since then. So, as you can see, I stare at screens that look like that pretty much all day. It's either that or I'm on a Zoom call. Some people might say, well, that sounds pretty boring. Well, it depends how you look at it. If you could look at that and think, oh, that looks horrible, or you could try to, as I do, you see that, but your mind is looking through that to what you're trying to build. And so something that I've been doing personally, not for the lab, but some interest that I've had personally is what's called facial recognition. And you guys have probably heard of this. And I could tell you where, and this is the direction I'm not going to go with the sermon, but in this space, in the facial recognition space, the progressives of this idea want to take our world into a place where you walk up to a store, you look up at a camera, the door unlocks, you walk in, you put a bunch of things in your basket, you don't talk to anybody, you don't see anybody, you come back to the door, you walk through a scanner, everything that's in your basket gets scanned, you walk out, and your bank account gets charged whatever you had in your basket. Now that's a pretty scary world to live in, because you could think, well, if the government doesn't like something that you do or something that you say, that door is not going to unlock for you. I'm not going to go there with this sermon, but I just want to let you know this is where this kind of stuff is headed. And being a programmer, being in this space, I see the desires and the ideas that are put forth of the people that are working in this space, and that's where it's headed. However, I wanted to use this same technology for my own purposes. I've had a couple, many of you know, my mom passed away in October, and we had a young boy pass away in our congregation there in Ellsworth, and I really wanted the ability, people wanted pictures, I wanted to put together a slideshow, and I really wish that there was this thing where I could just type in a name and get a bunch of pictures, and it didn't exist. So I said, well, I'm a programmer, I know this stuff, I'm just going to create it. So I've been on this project recently where trying to put together this thing where you can just search for pictures. You just type in a name and you get pictures. And so I've been learning all about this space. Here's some examples. I don't know if you can see the little dots on the screen there. But what's interesting is that when the computer finds these dots, these faces are almost as unique as a fingerprint. Our faces are unique as a fingerprint, and except for identical twins. I've been struggling with that. Identical twins, the software really can't tell them apart because they're genetically they're identical, and physically they're so close that a computer struggles with. But you can see here, it's picked out the eyes, the eyebrows. You can see Lelia there wearing sunglasses. It still found her. And those are that's how a computer would recognize. And these are not, when I ran it against my picture set, it put together groups of faces. It said, all these faces, we'll put that into a group. And I named the group. I said, well, that group is Dad, or that group is myself, or so forth. So faces are are as unique as a fingerprint. And so I want to talk a little bit about the science behind facial recognition, not just the computer side to this. Scientists for a while had been trying to figure out, what parts of the brain are used when we see faces, because there's this, we are hardwired to recognize faces. It's something that is just, obviously as Christians we know God has built this into us. And I don't know about you, I know some people have a harder time remembering faces, but when you see a face, or you have an experience with somebody and you meet them many years later, sometimes you pull that face back up and a name comes right along with it. Some people have a harder time with names, but there's this connection. We see a face and it just draws, it imprints into our mind. So I tell this story. There was this, so they were the scientists thought that there's these two glands in the back of our mind, or our brain here, in the lower part in our neck. And the scientists were speculating. Some were saying, well, there's no evidence, whatever. So there was this engineer. He was 47 years old, and he had been struggling with epilepsy since he was 11, these epileptic seizures. And it got to the point where he said, I've had enough. These are so horrible. I got to do something. So he went to Berkeley and had the scientists there say, I want you to do something to help me get rid of this epilepsy. Now, I don't know that I agree with what the scientists did here, but I'm just going to tell you, I'm telling the story. So the scientists said, okay, well, if we sort of stick some electrodes into the brain and we start stimulating some things, if we can cause an epileptic seizure, then we can figure out exactly where that center is in the brain, and we'll just sort of burn it out. Now, I don't know. You can make a judgment call on what you think about that, but that's so this guy was open for this. So he goes in there. You're probably wondering, how does this match with facial recognition? So the scientists had some probes stuck in here behind the ears, and they turned on the electricity, and the man said that all of a sudden, the scientists, he said their faces changed. He said all of a sudden their faces was like a hallucination, but it was with faces, just the faces, nothing else in the room changed. And they turned it off, and he said the faces went back to their normal faces. And they said, do you mind if we experiment with this a little more? Now, this was the story I was reading. I'm kind of surprised, but they did this. So they probed around, and sure enough, in these two glands in the back of his neck, it's right in the lower part of the brain, that's the center where we recognize faces. And as they would introduce the electricity, their faces would sort of change into all sorts of different faces that he'd seen in his past. And so they confirmed that in this paper that I was reading, that these two places indeed are where facial recognition takes place. So there's two pieces to facial recognition. One is recognizing that something is a face, and then our brain is so quick that it automatically kicks in and says, okay, can I take what I recognize and associate? Because you immediately, we see something, we associate it with, our brain immediately tries to associate with other things. So we don't necessarily just recognize faces that are human faces. So here is now I see smiles. I only see two windows, a water spout, and a fence. I don't know what you are seeing. But there's this term called I can't even say it, pareidolia, which is us finding faces in even inanimate things. Not just faces of humans or whatever, but, and here's some more examples. There's some peppers, there's some rocks, there's the moon, and you guys are still laughing, so you must see something here that beyond what just is here. But you can see our minds immediately want to recognize faces. Faces are just hardwired into our beings. So let's go back in time in our mind for a moment and think about the Garden of Eden, and think about Adam's Adam's first experience. What was Adam's very first experience? So God puts together Adam from the mud of the ground. He breathes into Adam the breath of life. And what do you think is Adam's first, what do you think happens? The Bible doesn't tell us that. And I believe that God's character isn't that he just creates Adam and then walks over and is, over here when Adam wakes up. I believe that, he is there. So Adam receives the breath of life, which means he takes his first breath. And then what's the next thing? You open your eyes, and then what do you see? You see Jesus, right? That's the first experience, and that's Adam's first memory. His first memory that Adam carries through the rest of his life is that first experience with God. And let's think about Eve's experience. Did Eve have a similar experience? Well, Adam gets put to sleep. God creates Eve, and I assume he breathes. It's the same process. So from Eve's experience, it's the same. Her first thing must be, now speculation, the Bible doesn't tell us this, but I have to imagine that their first experience, their first memory is to see God face to face. And, living in this perfect world. Now, Adam is asleep, he wakes up, God calls him over, and then what happens? They see each other. Adam and Eve see each other for the first time. Now, we kind of think, or I've thought in the past that, this was just a natural marriage, everything's great, they're just a couple and away they go. But did Adam and Eve even know each other at that point? They just seen each other, right? They now have to spend time together to get to know each other. And so, marriage is more than just seeing someone. It takes a while to get to know somebody. So let's look at some other cases of this. It's interesting, I don't usually study the Sabbath school lesson on weeks that I give a sermon. And I don't attend here regularly, so our talk about Abraham and Sarah this morning, it's amazing how God just brings things together and works out, how everything's going to tie together for the day. But here we see Abraham, Genesis 18, 1 and 2. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in his tent and door in the heat of the day. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. Now, did Abraham recognize these men for who they were initially? So he brings them in, he gives them, and then what does Abraham do? We even talked about it this morning. What does Abraham do with God? He negotiates. He negotiates. Will you save Sodom if there's 50 people, 45, 30, 10? And then what? And God says, I will save Sodom if there's 10 righteous people found there. Now, granted, we know there wasn't 10. But Abraham is having this conversation with Jesus, face to face. Now, it's interesting, and you brought this out this morning in our Sabbath school, Hebrews 13:2. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Let's look at another example. Now, I'm pulling pictures. This is not Moses, just in case anyone had any question. But in my mind, it might look something like Moses. I don't know. So Exodus 33:18 through 20. And this is Moses. God had asked Moses to come up to the mountain. And he said, I beseech thee, this is Moses, show me thy glory. And God said, I will make my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and will be gracious to whom I am gracious, and to show mercy unto whom I show mercy. And he said, Thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live. So obviously there's a different side of God here that is with Moses than there was with Abraham, because Abraham had a conversation, assumedly face to face, but here Moses is not allowed to. So God has a glorified form and God has a human form, and I'll let you take that question on your own study, because I can't go into that today. But in this particular case, he was not allowed to see God face to face. Now, we're going to get into what he did see and what the outcome of that was. But we also find this. Ellen White has this quote, and I find this very interesting because it's very similar. She was in vision. She said, "I saw the throne, and on it the Father and Son. I gazed upon Jesus' countenance." Now, I think I know that to be, that is his face. The countenance means the face. So she's able to look and see Jesus' face and admired his lovely person. The Father's person I could not behold, for a cloud of glorious light covered him. I asked Jesus if his Father had a form like himself. He said he had, but I could not behold it, for, said he, if you should once behold the glory of his person, you would cease to exist. This is the same thing that Moses was told up on the mountain. Cannot see the face of God. Now, we know that initially Adam and Eve were able to see God's face to face. But because of sin, that's been sort of removed. But it will come back. And I want to sidetrack just for a moment. If we could look at John 14, 7 through 9. I kept adding stuff to the sermon and didn't add slides, so I apologize. But John 14, 7 through 9. Because we talked about knowing somebody and we talked about seeing somebody. And the question is, are those different? Are those different? And I would argue that they're not, based on what we read here. John 14, 7 through 9. It says, "If you had known me, you should have known my Father also. And from henceforth ye know him, and what? Have seen him." So Jesus is saying is that if you knew me, you would have effectively seen the Father, even though we're not allowed to see the Father. And Philip said unto him, "Lord, show us the Father. It suffereth us." So Philip here doesn't understand. Jesus said unto him, "Have I been so long time with you, and yet ye hath not known me, Philip? He that hath seen me hath seen the Father. And how sayest thou, show us the Father?" So Jesus is saying that if you know him, you've seen him, and if you know Jesus, you have known and seen the Father. And I find that interesting. So let's go back to Moses. So Moses is up there with God. He gets the 10 Commandments, and he was he was there with the Lord 40 days, 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water. If you're in the presence of the life-giving God, do you need food? Obviously not. He is everything that you need to live, so you don't need food. And he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. And it came to pass, when Moses came down from the Mount Sinai, with 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, Moses did not know that his skin on his face shone as he talked to them. And when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, they were happy. Is that what it says? They were encouraged. What does it say? It says they were afraid. Now, did Moses even see God's face?
No.
No. But obviously what he did see was enough to even make just the radiance of that caused other people to be afraid. So that should give us some indication on how, I'm lost for words, how important God's face is, and how, I just can't come up with words for it, on how we should desire it. All right, let's look at another example of, in this case, not the ability to recognize. We look at Joshua. A few years later, after Moses, Joshua 5:13 through 15. It says, it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho. Now, Joshua is ready to go to war, and he is in war mode. That he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him and said unto him, are you with us, or are you against us? Are you for us, or against us? Are thou for us, or for our adversaries? So, obviously, Joshua is not able to recognize who this person is. And so, therefore, he asks them. But the answer was, he said, nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord, I have now come. Now, I'm guessing that's not exactly what Joshua was expecting, but Joshua fell down on his face to the earth and did worship, and said unto him, what saith my Lord unto his servant? And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, loose thy shoe off thy foot, for the place which thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. Based on our other knowledge of the Bible, who's Joshua talking to here?
Jesus.
Yes. There's two verses specifically, or one verse specifically, and another one kind of backs it up. What's the other one that tells us that this is Jesus? An example based on what happened here.
The only one I can think of that's contrary to that, so to speak, that he would know is that when the angel appeared to John and bowed, and the angel said, don't be bowing to me.
Revelation 22:8 and 9.
Here we go.
He said, don't bow to me, I'm a fellow servant.
Yep.
But there's another place in the Bible talking about taking your shoes off.
Moses in front of the burning bush.
Yes. So that's how we know who Joshua's talking to here. Because the burning bush was God telling Moses that you're on holy ground, take your shoes off. And here, Joshua bows down to him, and there's no indication that he shouldn't do that. So therefore, this is God. This is Jesus that has come to help Joshua through the battle. Now, granted, Joshua didn't recognize him, and that wasn't a penalty to him because he didn't recognize, but Joshua's response is what's important. When he realized, I'm talking to God, and bowed down. This was the other verse. I'm going to skip it. Let's look at another verse here. And this is kind of the point of my sermon. Luke 22:60 and 61. It says, Peter said, man, I know not what thou sayest. And immediately while he spake, the cock crew. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Here's Peter and Jesus looking at each other, maybe not close, but at least face to face. And what does this do for Peter? It brings back that association in his mind of what he had heard earlier. And the next verse here tells us that Peter went out and did what? Wept bitterly. So, would you say that Peter seeing Christ's face here had an effect on him? Did this instance change Peter? Changed Peter. Now, I want to connect what we were talking about in John there, about knowing and seeing. So if we go to Matthew, this is what Jesus tells us. His disciples are asking him. Matthew 7, 21, 23. Jesus says, "Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father, which is in heaven. Many shall say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? Have we not cast out devils, and in thy name done wonderful works?" And this is Jesus speaking. "And then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity." Why does Jesus say he doesn't know them? Does he not recognize them? Or is there something else? Are they not recognizable? As a Christian, you were touching on this, I think. Maybe one of you two were touching on this in your stories. I see you're passing the blame. Okay. When you're on the job site, do people recognize Christ in you? Do people not recognize Christ in you? This is what Jesus says, "I never knew you." And here's the ultimate ramifications of that. Revelation 6:16. And this is the people in response to Jesus. It says, "And they said unto the mountains and rocks, Fall on us and hide us from" what? The face. "Hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb." I don't know about you, but lambs don't really invoke sort of thoughts of wrath. They seem to be pretty docile, but obviously there is something else going on here. Why would someone want to be hidden from a face? We talked about this face recognition is important to us. We want to see God. But yet here's a group that doesn't want, they want to be as far, they want these rocks to cover them from this face. But we do have encouragement. This is what Luke tells us. Luke 21, 27, 28. This is for the other side of that, the group that's there. So there's one group that says, "Hide us from the face." This other group says, "And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and great glory. And when these things began to come to pass," what does it tell us to do?
Look up.
Look up. Because what are we going to see when we look up?
Jesus.
We're going to see Jesus' face, right? We're going to see that same face that these other people want to be hidden, said, "Hide us from this. Hide us from this face." But this says, "Look up. Look up, for your redemption draweth nigh." Now we look at the world around us and we wonder. We say, this world is crazy. This world is going, we know where it's going. It's just how much longer, how long is it going to keep going? But the Bible says, look up. Don't focus on this world. Don't focus on the problems. Look up. Look up to Jesus. And so I want to read this quote. This is from Ellen White. It says, "Late on that blood-soaked Friday afternoon, a voice is heard from the central cross in perfect clarity that all at the Calvary could hear. Jesus announced, 'It is finished.' He added, 'Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.' At that moment, a strong light encircled the cross, and Jesus' face shone as bright as the sun. Then his head dropped, and he died." So my question to you today, do you want to be affected by this face? Do you want to be changed by this face? Do you want this face to have an influence in your life? And we have this, our scripture reading for today. Because even though we are in this world and we read these things, we live in a very dark place. We live in a very dark world. It says, "For now we see through a glass darkly. But then, what is the promise? Face to face. We're going to go back to what Adam and Eve had in the garden. What was lost is going to be regained. But this is the only face that's going to change us to get us to that place. There's a couple other verses when I'm just going to paraphrase. When we get to heaven, talks about the sea of glass, talks about being around the throne, talks about all the angels, 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. Bible scholars generally accept that you take those numbers and you multiply them together. You would end up with 100 trillion, 3 times our national debt. 100 trillion faces. Can you even imagine that? Can you even imagine 100 trillion faces? I mean, we have maybe 1,000 friends, maybe for those of us more popular than others, a couple thousand friends. We're talking trillions. How long does it take to get to know a trillion people? Like angels specifically. Yeah, eternity. I mean, and being there around the throne where all the angels are, all we are, and looking up and seeing Jesus' face. I want to be there. How about you? So I'm used to being interpreted, so my sermon's a little short today, but I hope that you were blessed. And let's sing our closing song.
Okay, 206. Everybody wants to rise and sing.